Folks, we are live. Welcome to Talking Crit. I am Eric Tenkar, your bartender in the OSR. With me, as always, on this side of the screen is Bad Mike Battalato, my once-a-week work spouse. And with the weight of the show on his shoulders, the man who represented this show at GaryCon, the one and only Jim Kitchen.
Yeah, we got, that's one of the reasons we brought Jim on is to class this joint up because you and I are just,
I've got
who we are.
You should be happy I'm wearing a shirt.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. I mean, really.
Well, I mean, with the collar, I should say.
At this point, seriously, at this point of the show, after 5 years, you and I probably would be shirtless right now if it weren't for Jim. We would be shirtless and drinking beers and just like burping and just, what's up this week? Yeah,
Oh my Lord!
So Jim has classed the place up, and so yes, and we're going to talk tonight about what Jim was doing last week, and we're going to interject with a lot of little good, cool opinions we have, and talk about people that are talking about GaryCon and what GaryCon did this week, and what happened to GaryCon, and what that means for the industry, and just we're just going to do a little recap, and Jim's going to fill us in on a lot of goodies. And Jim was he probably won't toot his own horn, but maybe he will. He's got a little bit of an ego, but the news hit us that they broke the record last year. The auction. This is a charity auction. It's a charity auction for kids, and they were north of 120 this year, Jim. It was north.
So last year we did 93,000, which was a number that frankly seemed like we would never, ever, ever top it. And then, I mean, it's a much longer conversation. Well, let's talk about GaryCon first, and then we'll sort of end towards the auction. I think that's probably for the better because there's a lot of stuff that came out at GaryCon that I think our audience is going to appreciate, enjoy. I would say that this was a GaryCon that will go down as being one not to miss for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of it sort of centers around Dan Ayub. This is his first GaryCon. This is his first GaryCon since taking the role in being in charge of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to say some things that I'm sure there are parts of the OSR will be like, but I think there's a lot to unpack here. So let's start by talking about GaryCon. So this is the 18th GaryCon. This was Luke's tribute to his father. Originally, the very first sort of GaryCon 0 was the informal gaming that happened after the funeral when Gary died. It was so popular, and most of the people spent the day telling Luke, you ought to do this again, that's how GaryCon came to be. And so the tagline for GaryCon is celebrating a life well played. It celebrates Luke's dad. It celebrates the Gygax family. It has grown from its fairly small beginnings to a much, much larger affair. It's pretty much capped right now at about 4,000 people. I think you'd really struggle to try to get more people in the show. There was not the virulent con crud going around that I haven't heard of anybody who caught the walking death, but I tell you what, every year they manage to squeeze more gaming tables in a way that surprises me, but it works. And really, GaryCon is a show where a lot of the heavy lifting is devoted towards enabling play, enabling people playing games, and I think that's good, right? I'm all for a convention that has more people rolling dice, being shoulder to shoulder with people and having a good time. I think it's 4 times the size of North Texas. I'm sorry,
we're 600, so
600 now. Yeah. So it's 7 times the size of North Texas, but it's interesting, right? It's at the birthplace of TSR. It's at the birthplace of Dungeons and Dragons. There's a lot of emotional sort of feels that go on when you go to GaryCon and you're in Lake Geneva and you think about, what was it like in 1974 when they were in the basement putting together the wood grains and so on and so forth. And this stuff sort of hangs over you. And I find it's a great way to sort of recharge for the hobby, right? You come out of the winter and you're like, okay, Like this is great. Weather was very cooperative this year. Tons of special guests, a lot of the names we all know and enjoy. Alan Hammock was there, walking around. He claims that there was some surgery on his wrist. I'm not convinced it wasn't spousal abuse, but that's okay. We won't make that joke anymore. It was a lot of fun. I look forward to GaryCon every year. It's a show that mostly I used to go to play games. Now it's a mix of sort of a busman's holiday where I end up doing a lot of work. I'll come back to that. But the big news was who was there. And when I say who was there, I mean who was there to see what was going on at GaryCon. And the number one thing that everybody is talking about is Dan Ayub was there, who is the new president of Dungeons and Dragons. I had a chance to have dinner with Dan on Thursday night, and then I spent an extraordinary amount of time, probably 5+ hours, sitting around with him, as well as the crew of people who directly report to Dan, who he brought to GaryCon to see GaryCon.
Let's back this up. So
Sure.
you're saying that Watsy actually attended a con in force. This is
yes, and I think there's a really good point to this, which is Dan Ayub got the call and was offered the job and said, I want to think about it. I want to think about it for a day. And when he got off the phone call, his wife essentially swore at him, and I won't say what she said, but it was essentially, "Are you out of your effing mind?" Now he's from Montreal, so they are in French, so there was probably a lot of tabernacle. But she essentially chewed him out and said, "What are you thinking?" And interestingly, after he accepted the job, three of the people I met in addition to Dan on Thursday night, one of them is a Wizards community manager. I think very highly of her. She was just great. And two of them were two people that Dan had worked with, but who he extended offers to take positions under his new leadership. And I think it's very telling that he brought an entire party of Wizards management, some level of management, to come to GaryCon to see GaryCon. And I think that if there was one phrase that would really sort of sum up my impression, and I'll talk to some of the things I can. There's some things I can't, because there's some things that get said over a really good bottle of bourbon that you're not supposed to share, and I won't. But they're really going back to the roots. They're really going back to the roots. And one of the things that is clear, one of the things that got announced is that they will be publishing Melf's Guide to Greyhawk next year. And so that's a project that involves Luke Gygax writing for Wizards of the Coast, and he will be working with Wizards on new content. I can tell you that all the questions that we've had come up on this show, all the questions that have come up within the community, all the questions that come up regularly within the OSR and the Greyhawk communities and so on and so forth, there's a lot of, oh God, here we go again. And I will tell you that this is not the case. Let's talk about some of the more obvious stuff. Monetization of D&D online. One of his first tasks is he tasked the online people to start ripping thing after thing after thing out of it, because at the heart of what it should be is that it should be tools to running games online. It should not be, would you like to buy this? Would you like to buy that? Would you like to buy personalized colors for your character sheet? By the way, that's $5, or you could subscribe for what? No. And so it's very interesting. I think we're, if I understood Dan correctly, we're 2 or 3 months away from seeing a fundamental transformation of D&D Beyond from the, frankly, money-making grift machine to something far more useful for people who actually play Dungeons and Dragons and want to play online. That rolls me into another sort of side topic on this, Gen Con. One of the points I made to Dan was, you don't have a booth at Gen Con. I'm sorry, you don't have a booth where you're selling your own products at Gen Con. You've mostly walked away from Gen Con for the last 10, 15 years. I said the last serious promotion you did at Gen Con was when 5.0 was coming, and you essentially had a tournament. I said, but then after that you sloughed off the sales, you sort of, and he goes, right. He goes, people are going to be exhausted by the full court press we put at Gen Con. He said, we have so many announcements for Gen Con. He said, we're going to be doing panel after panel after panel after panel after panel after panel. We're going to be selling at Gen Con. These are his words, not mine.
Huh?
And they're going to be back with a vengeance. And I mean, if I was some of the other companies, be careful what you wished for, because you just got it. You got a guy who's absolutely determined to see them back as a market leader. And so, like all the things, I'm seeing some of the comments, and I'm just going to say, you have no idea. He told me a story that is very NDA right now. But when he told me the story, I just had an oh shit moment. Like, this was not a light move, right? I mean, it took a couple of gigantic brass ones, but in his first week on the job, he snapped his fingers and said, we're doing this. And that's when you sort of knew that there's a new sheriff in town. They know all the mistakes, right? The Dan and the three people that were with him when we were sort of sitting around on Thursday night, they've gotten punched in the nose countless times by everybody that's in our comments and so on and so forth. They have a very clear direction. At one point I said, you know, one of my critiques on this show has been this constant use of these sort of soft watercolor palettes and how blah most of the art in the books looks. And I said, Jesus, I said, there's 50 unbelievably talented black and white artists who could be producing stuff, who could be producing stuff for you. And he goes, we know. and so, like, right off the bat, you know, this is pretty interesting. I think they are hyper aware of all this. They donated something to the auction. I'll get back to that. I think, you know, Ty, I don't think you're going to see them go back and remove anything from products that have already been published. I think it's going to be the tone of the products going forward. I think that's what I would say to that. We had some very honest discussions. He said, well, if you were me, what would you do? And I said, I would shut the entire offices for a week, and I would send everybody out to go visit retail stores and go get a really good idea of what's going on. And it was very interesting to hear the other WotC staff members talk about how you know, 5.5 was moribund until just a couple of months ago, and they started to see an uptick. And you know how we always talk about how the left hand doesn't know what the right is doing? They weren't aware. They hadn't connected the dots that 5.0 is sold out at all the distributors. You can't get 5.0 from any game distributor in North America right now. Everybody's out. And they weren't aware of this. Like, they didn't connect the dots. And I think that's another one of these sort of no-brainers, right? And I said, you know, if it were me, I'd do a one-time solicitation for I think I'd do a one-time solicitation for you'll get as many as you request, as many as you order for 5.0 products, and give them one last drink at the well. But it's very clear they're focused on moving past 5.5 as quickly as possible. There's no question of that. I think that's lockstep. Everybody's on board in that direction. I think, you know, I'm seeing a lot of stuff going up here and so on and so forth. They know what they've done. There's no question. Dan knows what they've done. I feel like we got along well enough. I'll call him Dan.
Well, Jim, hold on real quick. When you say they know what they've done, what you really mean to say, and I'm saying is they know what the regime before them did.
That's correct.
Because they cleared house on a lot of the rubbish. And I want to bring another point here because we're going to get hammered here. Now we're already getting hammered.
Oh, I don't care.
Here's the deal. Do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. No, they are not going to walk in tomorrow and say we're bringing back first edition and it's going to be our flagship rule set. We're appointing Gillespie, Talanian, Conley, and Block as our lead designer. You have to be realistic about what you're going to expect from them and what you're going to get. And is it? Look, I'm not going to play 5e no matter what they do. They're going to change anything, and it's not about.
And I'm just going to say Ty's wrong. I'm going to tell you right now, unequivocally, the last thing that Ty typed in the chat, anything's possible. I don't think the odds favor real change. That's bullshit, and Ty's wrong.
Well, Ty, it depends on what you mean by real change.
I'm telling you from the stuff I can talk about publicly and the stuff I can't talk about publicly, Ty's wrong. Because really, hands down, this is a absolutely fundamental transformation of Wizards from where they were and where they want to go.
Yeah.
And he's been given the carte blanche to do it.
It's never going to be exactly what a lot of us want. It's just not.
Here, let me give you a sentence. Let me give you a sentence that sums up how different the regime is. Right? Which is, at one point in our past, in our glorious halcyon days of youth, TSR was selling first edition. They were selling the white box, which was the original brown box. They were selling second edition. Right? You could get all of these things at the same time. And nobody was harmed in this process. And when you hear the new president of Dungeons & Dragons say, it doesn't matter what you want to play. We want to make the audience happy all across the board because you can have first edition players at the same time that you have second edition players. At the same time you have third edition. Everybody makes fun of fourth edition players, and you can have fifth edition. And God help us, there may be 2 or 3 people out there that are 5.5 fans. But for the most part, you can have all these things simultaneously because I think what we would all say is they've hyper-focused on what I would call a slim segment of the overall role-playing audience as their key demographic. And Ayub is literally dragging those blinders wider and wider and wider with every day that he's there. And again, we had a free-ranging conversation for 5 hours, and we talked with no holes barred about what we saw as systemic failure over the last few years. There was a lot of throwing themselves on the sword, and I think, again, right, the proof is in the pudding. What are you going to see? But the man's already planned the biggest foray at Gen Con that's come out of Wizards in a decade. He has announced a linchpin product for the line that speaks directly to, you know, what do we always hear? Well, why don't they do something with Greyhawk? Well, you're getting something that's set with Greyhawk. You're getting Luke Gygax involved with a Greyhawk product. Like, I'm not sure what more you want, how much more Greyhawk it has to be.
Because it's not going to be exactly the Greyhawk.
But indeed, it is not going back to my copiously documented notes in regards to first edition Greyhawk, and I need all that Greyhawk in my Greyhawk. Okay.
And here's the thing: people have to remember. All right, D&D is like an ocean liner in motion. It does not spin on a dime.
Oh, dude, it's a flippin' gigantic super tanker.
Okay, so it's not. It. People want to go, well, I want to reverse course. No. It will slowly, gradually, but it doesn't happen over time. It happens over time.
Hey, bring up Helio's comment. I think they will release a product to compete with Shadow Dark. I got news for you. They had a great conversation with Kelsey. Do you know who told me that? Kelsey said we had a great conversation. And you know what? They don't want to have a Shadow Dark. Because if D&D goes about doing the one thing that it has to do right, which is creating new RPG customers, then all the other boats are going to rise.
Yep.
And Kelsey had a phenomenal conversation with Wizards to the point that she was bubbling about it. Not because they said, Kelsey, indeed, we wish to write you a check for $5 million and buy Shadow Dark. No, they had a great conversation with her about how all these things play well together, right? Because one of the things we talked about is thematically, and we're really down a rat hole here, but when you look at Shadow Dark, what comes to mind, right? Unbelievable black and white artwork. This is what led to my point with him. I said, Jesus Christ, you guys have all this watercolor, wishy-washy color artwork. I said, when there are black and white artists out there producing some of the most amazing artwork, and it's being snapped up by everybody in the middle tier. And he goes, oh, you're right. Hasn't been lost on us. Figured this out. And so I think what we will see is we will probably see some use of black and white interior artwork, which I'm happy. I'm happy for artists that aren't in the WotC stable being hired to be in the WotC stable. This is nothing but good. Talk is cheap, Ty, and so is just being snarky in the comments.
Let me add one more thing, Jim. I want to add one thing. Just the fact that they were willing, that when you said, hey, this sucks, and they said, yeah, we know it sucked. Is there a universe of possibilities where that would have ever happened if you talked to somebody in charge in the Perkins and Crawford regime? Zero. No.
First of
they
all,
would have never admit. They would have said you're wrong for wanting something different than what we're doing. We know exactly.
You're over 40, and you're not aligned with us. Therefore, you are wrong. That's what you would have gotten.
I think the bigger thing is that it was not lost when I pointed out that my favorite point to make is that it used to be 4 years ago that the entire basement of the Grand Geneva at GaryCon was filled with Pathfinder players. And that's been completely overtaken as of last year with Shadow Dark players. There's just no organized Pathfinder play.
Wow.
And he's pretty clear we're going in this direction, right? And the unimplied statement, I mean, it didn't come out of Dan's mouth, but is, if you don't agree with this direction, there's always other places you could be, and they would welcome with open arms, maybe. But the fact is, there's a lot of people at Wizards of the Coast that were all on board for how things have gone over the last 5 or 6 years. And I think it's very telling that Dan handpicked his team and took them with him into the new, call it regime. And these are people that he's worked with. And I think that's another, this is a guy who's had success. And it's very clear they're letting him run the playbook. It's very clear they're letting him run the playbook. And what we've talked about on the show previously, right? That you've got an 18-month, 24-month production cycle to get things in print. He inherited a swamp, and the only way you can clean out the swamp is to drain it. And he's making those motions. When I talked about the squandered opportunity of 50th Dungeons and Dragons, when I talked about the squandered opportunity of the 50th anniversary, I mean, Ty's making eye-rolling jokes in the comments, but you could see the visible pain on his face.
It was embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
He goes, "You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right." And he talked about his predecessors. He talked about how, the fellow from Amazon was like, we're just going digital and blah, 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 blah. And he says, and this is somebody from Amazon. Of course, they're going to say, we're going to go digital and we're going to do all these things and so on and so forth. But I'm fascinated, right? He talked about shopping at a local store in Montreal growing up. And I made the guess it was going to be one of the two stores, the big stores in Montreal. It was either going to be Valet de Cour or it was going to be Libre Donjon. And of course it was Valet de Cour. So the guy's roots are as deep as any of us, but he's been given the keys to the kingdom and he's been given full authority. Again, another one of these sort of little NDA stories, but holy shit. Like in his first week, he made an alpha flex move that told everybody there's a new sheriff in town. and I applaud that. I think that's fantastic.
Can you
So
not? You can't tell what that mood is, can you?
no, I can't. I shouldn't. I might be able to, but here's the deal.
I think we don't.
He saw something that was so fundamentally wrong that every single person in this chat, whether you believe in him or not, whether you're as agnostic as could be, or if you're just give me my torches and pitchforks, I want to start now. He saw something that all the rest of us would have seen, and he did something about it. And that, I mean, you know, he made a decision that cost money, and that's the best part, right? Like somebody's like, well, we'll see what happens. Jesus Christ. In the first week, he did something that was like, nope. And that's pretty, that's,
if it's this thing I'm thinking about, this is a thing that would have never happened in the last 5 years, correct?
Oh, no, never.
Not
And
a
by,
chance this would have happened.
and by the way, I know you had a good conversation with Dan, because I had 2 people PM me say, my God, Jim's been talking with Dan Ayub for a couple of hours right now. I was like,
yes.
Okay.
And come on, like I was like, let's go. Come on. At one point, I told one of the WotC staffers, I said, it's been more than 20 years and you pussies haven't gotten a copy of Gamma World out lately. And they were like, well, we'll bring back 4th edition. I was like, no.
So you're telling us you were not serving him softballs?
No, I certainly wasn't.
Please hit this over the fence, Dan. Dan, do you like your job? Are you happy?
No,
I mean, you weren't serving him any.
Like I'm not on the dark side, and frankly, all we have is your word. Fuck you. I like, I can't make some people happy, and I don't even try, because the fact of the matter is there was more of a WotC presence at GaryCon. There was more of a Dungeons and Dragons presence at GaryCon than there's been in years. And there was, more than anything else, there was effort. And there was effort across the board. There was effort across a lot of the game tables. But I'll talk about the other big. I don't want to talk about the auction just yet. But come on, they donated a prize to the auction. They got the single largest amount we raised. I'm sorry, it had the single highest price for anything we sold in the auction. And they've never, ever donated anything like this before. And I'll get back to that. But I would say, right, I wouldn't hold your breath because you'll faint. But the fact of the matter is that there is a new marshal in town. So here's the first proof of pudding. Let's see what happens with D&D Beyond. Let's see what happens with D&D Beyond, and let's see what fundamental changes happen in D&D Beyond between now and call it July. But my impression is this stuff is coming hard and it's coming fast. And the big thing is, and I think, again, you remember how TSR used to use the Gateway to Adventure with the catalog?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they're now treating Gen Con as their announcement for everything coming for the next year. And they're going to literally haul everything out and show you what's coming for the next 12 months, starting at Gen Con. And I think this is good. I think this is the way it used to be. I like this because it gives everybody something to sort of figure out. He talked very directly about how there were 3 books that came out very short order after 5.5 shipped, that it sort of was like boom, 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 boom. I haven't bought any of them, but I guess they came too hard and too fast at the retail level, and they've been sort of moribund. I did tell him I almost brought the Vecna book to give back to him, and he really enjoyed that. He really liked that. I thought that was good. I think that again, it's a while until August, but it ain't that long. And I think the D&D Beyond changes are the first things out of the gate, and I think we're going to see those. I think the timeline that was 2 to 3 months, so we'll see. Ty, you're just going to stay angry for a while. I'm not listening. And Ty's just one.
But you know what? No, you know what? I'm going to tell you right now.
And I'm sorry, wait, I'm going to correct John Miller. Gen Con doesn't have new owners. There's been a change in the way the shares have been. Peter sold shares. And in fact, and I don't want to get into a lot of this, but I actually met with 2 members of the board of Gen Con while I was at GaryCon. and I'm not really at liberty to discuss what we talked about, but I met with two of them, and they're not new owners. They're existing owners who have reproportioned the shares.
Look, Ty is absolutely reasonable what he's saying, because talk is absolutely
Sure.
talk is cheap. And I say in the chat, and I will live by this. I owe zero loyalty to 5e, zero loyalty to WotC. I haven't bought a WotC product in 10 years. The last thing I bought from WotC was the reprint books, the Dungeons of Dread and the other one. And if nothing changes in a year, I will be the first one to light a torch and sharpen a pitchfork. I don't have any loyalty to these people. I don't
That's
know
right.
any of these people. I don't care.
I don't either.
But I'm willing to say, okay, I've been kicked in the nads a lot over the last few years. If you're not going to kick me, if you tell me you're not going to kick me in the nads, I'm willing to not be kicked in the nads. So, let's see what you got. And look, Ty, you're right. Talk is cheap. Talk is absolutely cheap. If nothing's done, then we'll know it. And we'll be sitting here a year from now and say, you know what? Well, they said they were going to do a lot of things. They didn't do them. Well, we got screwed.
They announced the Melf cover, though. Interestingly enough, when they made the announcement with Luke, they actually showed the cover of the new book, which is floating around on the internet. Ty, I'm not handing out knee pads and chapstick, buddy. That's your job, not mine. But really and truly, I think just as we have WotC fanboys and girls from the last couple of years who have been, WotC can do no wrong, and we hate you old grognards and so on and so forth. I think we have people who are too far the other way, and I think that the more.
But Jim, can you blame them?
No, I can't. But at the same time, there is a time you can remember the grievances, but you can't live them every day. And we have people that just want to carry grudges. I'll come back to this, right? We are a hobby of misfits, and I had two great examples of misfitty behavior over the weekend, and I'll talk about that as well. But let's get back. So GaryCon was amazing. Like a lot of great stuff going on at GaryCon. Happy to see Wizards back. Happy to see, okay, so they drove us away. No, they put out stuff you didn't like, and you chose not to buy it or not participate in it. But they didn't drive you away. They didn't put you into buses. They didn't haul you out of here, and so on and so forth. But that's a mock-up, and I think I've actually seen a different one. Where did you get that one?
That one was on one of the Enworld has another one, but it doesn't seem like it's the cover either. I'll pull that one up.
No. So interestingly, somebody says, I have 5e books gathering dust. Sure, put them on eBay and watch them sell. And they're going to go like that, because there is a market for 5e books out there right now. So that, I think, is the mock-up. That is not, because the other one that you had up with the painting by Jeff Easley is the actual cover. Okay. Because Vince Vaughn won it during the auction and then turned around and gave it to Luke and gave it to him as a right. And again, I think one of the things that's so clear in hearing Dan is that he understands, you absolutely peed all over the founding fathers of the hobby. You spent years doing this. And the fact of the matter is I think Dan's a smart enough guy to understand you can't fix that overnight. Like, you got to build that back. And I think that Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss.
Oh, I forgot about that.
There's a massive project with Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman that my understanding is going to be announced at Gen Con. And I think that again, right? Like, you're talking about Perkins. Perkins is not the man in charge of D&D anymore. The guy who does make the decisions about D&D is somebody who's been playing D&D for 30, 40 years. And frankly, he gets it. Like, he understands it. I think that's what's striking, right? Is that here's a guy who actually can see that D&D isn't just the last 3 years worth of books or the last 10 years worth of books, that it's 50 years worth of books. and it's 50 years worth of audience. And I think that's, yeah. It's reasonable to decline. Whatever. Ty, I get it. Just keep typing, man, and that's fine. But where
Let it all out, sir.
just
Let
get it
it
out of your
all out,
system, because
Ty.
the
Just
fact of the matter is
let it
that
out.
Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman have said we can't talk about it, and we will be able to talk about it. And they didn't have to announce Melf's Guide to Greyhawk, but they chose to do it at GaryCon because it was the right place to do it. We'll see what they do. We'll see what they come up with. I think after Gen Con, we'll have a great idea of what next year's products are going to be, and next year's products are all going to be under Dan Ayub's watch. We will see. You know what? I see this. They need to go on a 3-year apology tour. No, they don't. They've made some apologies, and the fact of the matter is all they need to do is publish product that you can choose to buy or not.
Jim, this is letting off steam from people who have been.
Sure. And I'm sorry. I'm
badly.
sorry that I bear the message that things might be getting better and you can't process it, but that's not my fault. And I get that, like a battered spouse, you're just flinching every time somebody says the word wizards. But I'm telling you that whether or not you want to believe it, there's change coming. Is it the change you want to see? It probably isn't. The truly entrenched, angry people are always going to be entrenched and angry. But for the rest of us who can see some sort of middle ground, I think that you're going to find a lot of.
Can we just have an incremental better? I mean, that's
what it is, right?
That's all I expect. I don't expect anything.
I thought a lot about our favorite Grognard, thinking about the Greyhawk book, right? And I think that one of the striking things is that there is no shortage of Greyhawk material out on the internet. And our beloved Greyhawk Grognard has been a part of. He's had his finger on that pulse as deep as anybody can. I'm sure that he will be disappointed in some of the things that will be in the new Greyhawk.
He absolutely will, Jim.
But I also think it's a new flippin' Greyhawk book, and there was never going to be a new flippin' Greyhawk book under the Perkins people, and I think it's hope for the best.
They personally detested anything to Greyhawk.
That's right.
Because you know why, Jim? They had no point in creating it. And they were all about, if we had nothing to do with it, then it doesn't exist. And that was their attitude for 10 years, is that they did not want to do things that weren't something they created, because they wanted to be able to say, this is something we did. This is a fundamental change.
It is.
It's people think it's not. The fact that they're willing to go back to something that the previous regime said, no, we didn't have anything to do with that. We're not touching it. We're not going to help that brand.
That's right. There's been an apology tour for a while. We've talked about it on the show. You could admit that there has been, you can say there hasn't been, but you're just fooling yourself. And I'm not being condescending or dismissive, but I just see the same voices carping and saying the same things. And the fact of the matter is, there have been changes, right? We had Wizards at GaryCon. We had Wizards donating a prize to the GaryCon auction. We had the president and staff going around being more present than anybody from Wizards has been for a long time. And I get, I understand being dismissive because of prior regimes. I understand that. But the fact of the matter is that this sort of blanket cynicism, it's not going to get better, and you don't know what you're talking about. Well, you weren't there, and I was. And I can tell you that all the hardest questions that you could possibly put to somebody without actually getting in their face and screaming got put to him. And again, I understand healthy skepticism, but there's a difference between healthy skepticism and, frankly, some of the caterwauling.
But Jim, it's not an untowards reaction.
I think there's reasonable, and then I think there's just tantrum. And
but then there's never, some people are never going to be happy no matter what happens. It doesn't matter. And then that's not the right. People, they're not going to make those people happy anyway. I mean, there's still Dallas Cowboys fans out there that are mad because Tom Landry got fired, 40 years ago, and they're just never going to be. And I've talked to those fans. They say, I've never watched a Cowboy game since then. I never will. I can't make you happy. And okay, well,
that's right.
We're just going to part ways here, and we're going to go off.
And the end result is that you don't have to spend a dime on their products if you don't want to. Jesus, just wait. Like, it seems to be about 2 weeks and somebody's got pirated copies out on the internet if you're that cheap.
2 weeks, you mean 2
I
days.
know. But again, right? Like, nobody makes you buy this stuff. And you can rail about it and not buy it, and that's fine, and that's great. But I can tell you, and Ty's just being specious now, but that's Ty because he's got to do it. The fact of the matter is, that yes, I said it. If you're going to take this to the nth potential of they're never going to change, blah blah blah. Take a flying leap because nobody's ever going to make you happy. Nobody's ever going to make you happy, and that's fine. Live that. I think that the rest of us will wait and see what happens. But I feel confident that there's some milestones that you can see. I think the short-term milestone is D&D tools because he's made an aggressive move on that, the D&D Beyond. I think the next step is Gen Con, which is further away than I think is relevant to our discussion tonight. But I think there's going to be a lot of announcements at Gen Con. It's obvious to me that because he's got Weiss and Hickman, I think we're going to see something major Dragonlance, which would be spectacular. I know that we all want it to we all want hand wavium, right? We all want to just wave our hands and suddenly everything is sorted out right. And I think that it will never fit, no matter what your vision is, whatever they do will never fit it. It just won't. It's going to be what it is. And if it creates more players, that's great. If it creates products that harken back to it, because we had a very interesting discussion about the reprints, right? That a few years ago they did those terrible reprints of they did those terrible reprints of A1234, S123, and so on.
See, I didn't think they were terrible because I was just
they were reproduced very poorly.
Well, yeah, but the fact they just did it was that's the last thing I probably bought from WotC because I was happy.
Yeah, I bought them
I just
too.
wanted to support it. I wanted to
terribly
support
mortified. But like one of the things they said, they were like, "What's one of the things that we could do to make things better?" And I said, the lowest hanging fruit you have is to go back to all the PDFs and clean them up. I said, because the PDFs look terrible. For the most part, the PDFs are garbage.
Terrible.
And I said, you could go back and you could do a rescan of all of that material, clean it up the right way, and repackage the PDFs. And even if you double or triple the size of the file, I said people would be so happy just because you gave them a better fidelity. And so what do you, Mike, Eric, what do you think might have happened at that point? So I say that's one of my answers.
Okay, working on it.
It's in the hopper. We're going to do it.
Scribbles a note because they hadn't thought about it. And
well, that's a change.
That would be very
right.
That would be
awesome. So I can't say that they're going to do it, but the very fact that one of them's like texting his team about it, I think that's a good. I mean, come on, that's traction. And all of the chat, all of the comments in the chat, all the warble garble in the chat, that's people wanting traction. They want to be heard.
Oh yeah.
They don't want to be disparaged. They don't want to be dismissed. They want to be heard. And if we get a new Dragonlance product, that's the Dragonlance community being heard. We're getting a new Greyhawk product. That's the Greyhawk community being heard. Is Dark Sun on the horizon? I have no idea. It didn't come up. I managed to bring up Gamma World, and they talked for about 10, 15 minutes about the stupid card version.
But by the way, the whole thing about Dragonlance, I want people to remind people a couple years ago, they were so out on Dragonlance, they basically told Weiss and Hickman to take a flying leap. Yes. And not even finish their third book.
We talked about the covers. Oh my God, we talked about the awful Dragonlance paperback cover. and that's a pretty fabulous thing, right? When everybody says, yeah, wrong guy, wrong job, shouldn't have had him.
And didn't we figure out it wasn't even poor artist that he had been told to draw crap, and so he had to draw crap
Yeah,
because
he
we
was
found
told
some other artwork of
he's
his and it wasn't
he's a
bad.
landscape art guy, and they told him to draw the
Yes.
figures, and he did the best he could, but that's not his wheel well. Yes.
That's people not paying attention. That's what you get when you have people in charge of your company that aren't paying attention and don't care. And that's what we're saying is you have a change right there from people who cared so little about Weiss and Hickman. They said, yeah, you know that trilogy you're working on, get out of here. We don't care. We're not interested.
Right.
They've gone from that to Weiss and Hickman, awesome.
Well, and I
Dragonlance
think
book
the very
will do that.
notion of them going to all digital is not the case. It's very clear that they're committed to paper. They're very committed to actually publishing something so that you can actually have. And truthfully, Ty's latest snarky comment, the fact of the matter is that Dan Ayub understands there's nowhere for them to go but up. Short of an even more catastrophic step of just completely getting rid of print and turning it into electronic and so on. But there's a reason he got put in charge. There's a reason he got put in charge. And I think what we're seeing is he's just laying the groundwork for them to go the other direction than where they've been headed. And frankly, I would say that the products over the last 2 years that I've been on this show have demonstrated all the reasons why Ty and the other folks have a lot of vitriol, is that they were dismissive of the people who came before. They repeatedly said, well, we don't want you guys we don't want this segment of the audience because this is a more important part of our audience. And if you listen to Ayub talk, he doesn't want this silo. He wants this silo. He wants it as broad as it can be. And I think that's pretty spectacular. That's the thing that's important. And I don't understand the hate for Chris Cox. And I'll ask people to sort of get into it and try to explain that to me, because I met him for a nanosecond. And then I actually saw him do something that, frankly, he didn't have to do, but he didn't do it for PR. He did something nice. I think Cox is the guy who understands that the single division of Hasbro that makes them money is Wizards of the Coast, and it's Magic. And we could spend a whole night on Magic and how they've made a mess of that, but they basically overprinted cards. They've created subsets and so on and so forth, and Dungeons and Dragons. Those are the two linchpins that make WotC the single big profit center for Hasbro. And Chris Cox understands that. And Chris Cox chose Dan Ayub to go that direction and fix all of that.
But Chris Cox is also the one that basically loves AI and said something along the lines of it's the great leveler of content, yada yada.
But I would temper that with, they hired a guy from Amazon to run Dungeons and Dragons. They let him dig his hole. They said the things publicly they needed to say. And yes, there's a big future in whether we all want to believe it or not, we all spend money for some aspect of online gaming in some way, shape, or form. Everybody's different, right? I play the Fallout Shelter game, and they've now introduced seasons. And I usually will pony up the $20 for the 3 or 4 month season just because. But that's the only online game I spend money on, right? I'm a guy that doesn't understand the fascination of that. I don't have a paid D&D Beyond account. I have a free one. I think that they recognized how badly they screwed up, and Dan is in a Hail Mary play. I think Dan is the guy they picked to right the wrongs, and I think he's got a lot of wrongs to right. I think there's a lot of stuff. So we'll see. We will see.
So can I add some stuff here, Jim, real quick? So
jump in.
Look.
I've made everybody angry. So please.
No. Look, here's the deal. I don't blame one person on here that's venting, because you've seen the show the last few years. Eric, I've gone on rants. Yep. Eric's gone on rants. We've all gone on rants at one time or another because they've done something so egregious the week before that we can't even believe it. I mean, our minds are exploding about why they would have said or done that. So we've all been there to where we're like, who is running the place? What are they doing? And why are they doing what they're doing? So we've all been there. I tell you, in my case, though, I am willing to extend an olive branch of let's see what you can do. I'll give you a year to see what you can change or what you're doing differently. Because I'm sorry, guys, nothing is as bad as what we had the last few years.
Oh,
nothing
God,
as bad
no.
as the absolute shit show
Okay.
that Perkins and Crawford were in charge of, in the way that they treated fans and the things they said under their watch. Now, whether or not they personally believe that stuff, I have no clue, but it happened while they were there, and they weren't really in charge. They're just designers. But look, we've all been there. So yes, I absolutely understand. Show me, don't tell me, show me. But you do have to be willing to give that little bit of a, okay, we're going to give you 6 months, a year. I mean, you have to give them a little time to change something and just see what happens. And rather than just say it's going to be the same no matter what, nothing's going to change. It's not going to change.
I want to throw something in real quick because, like, I listen. Skepticism is healthy. I'm privileged to some information that's going on behind the scenes that is going to make people in the OSR surprised and probably happy. But and I thought it was going to get announced at GaryCon. It hasn't been, but I can say that I personally know that there is at least a change in the temperature. It's warming up a bit to the idea that we need to expand our market to a lot more than just what the prior regime was focusing on. So you can be skeptical. If you think I'm blowing smoke up your ass, why are you watching this live stream? Okay? Honestly, all right. If I could tell you,
we're all on your side. Look, we've all ranted about exactly all the points I brought up in an earlier post here. The things they've just done the last year, starting with, we can go all the way back to starting when they had the press, when they had the conference where they said we need to be monetizing this brand more. And Eric and I were like, I can't remember if Jim was with us then. But we were like, I don't like the sound of this. Boy, this sounds bad. And then the whole OGL fiasco. And then, I don't want to have to go over every single point because there's too many. But we've all been there. And we have absolutely been, yeah, you're right. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this guy said this. But when somebody comes in and says, you're right, that was all really bad, because the people before him would have never said that. The Microsoft and Apple execs that were running the company, they had never played a game of D&D in their life. I don't care what they told us, they lied. They did not play D&D. They didn't know what.
A load of horse shit.
A lot of them thought, to this day, probably think D&D is a video game. I'm absolutely certain of that. I have no doubt that a lot of them to this day still think that D&D is some kind of weird video game. For all I know, Christine Williams or whatever is off there. Did you work on D&D? Yeah, that's that video game I worked on for about a year and it didn't go well. She probably has no clue what she worked on. So we've all had this exact same feelings. You guys haven't done it. I'm just saying, I'm willing, from what I hear, and Eric is the same way, Jim, we hear things. I'm willing to give a little bit of rope.
Yes, because it's the unwillingness, the part that I find the part that I essentially have no time for and can F right off. No, I said it earlier, fuck right off. Is this just absolute obstinacy that nothing's going to change? It's all just lies, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is like a conspiracy theory, right? And the lack of evidence is more support of the conspiracy theory. I'll tell you the biggest thing that tells me we're in a whole new regime, which is Dan Ayub wants to come on the show. This show. Dan Ayub wants to come on Tenkar's Tavern. And if you can show me at any point where Chris Cox or any of the other people who've been involved with D&D for the last 10 years have been willing to come on the show, go ahead and show me. But Dan Ayub is wanting to come on the show.
None of those guys
sorted out the details yet.
Know who we are or cared who we were, because they didn't care what anybody. These are people that stopped going to conventions years ago because they didn't care anymore. That they didn't go to freaking Gen Con.
That's
they
right.
didn't care.
That's right. They couldn't be bothered to go
to
to
the
Gen
biggest
Con.
game convention in the United States. They couldn't go to Gen Con because it just
Right.
whatever. 5E's selling like hotcakes, boys. We don't have to show up for the convention.
Whatever.
So anybody just the fact that Jim said, look, if he's lying to Jim's face, at least he lied to Jim's face, because the other people would have never even said they did anything wrong. Can you imagine going up to one of those people that ran the company into the ground the last few years and saying, hey, do you think you made a mistake with this? And they would be like, nah, we did the best.
Let's look at this, right? So there's at least two products that we know for certain. We know that there's Melf's Guide coming for Greyhawk. And I think you'd have to be a fool not to believe that there's something Dragonlance coming, based on the fact that everybody associated with Dragonlance is saying, I can't talk about it right now. Those are two pieces of fan service that the last regime wasn't willing to give us. We all remember how awful Spelljammer was. Oh my God, I'll never get my money back out of that. And we all remember anyway. So let's wait and see. We're into the second hour, so I think we ought to talk about the auction. So, and I will say this, right?
Let's
so
move
Dan,
to the feel-good portion.
let me just say that Dan committed to coming on the show. I called him tonight and got his voicemail, which doesn't surprise me. I have a text into him. We'll see. When that moment comes, we'll talk about it. If for whatever reason, maybe tonight's show kills this idea, we'll blame it on me. That's fine. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the stuff that we've talked about over the last year or two, especially since Dan was announced for the job, has played out exactly the way I thought, right? That he inherited everything that had come before him. He literally executed on some things, and he also executed some things.
Yes.
And for the fact of the matter is that, like, I put some tough questions to him. I put some very tough questions to him. And I raised some of the points that are all coming up in the chat, that are coming up in all the rest of it. And he stood right in the gale. So
you don't have to keep defending this, Jim. Let's move on, because either you're going to believe it's going to change or not, but the proof's of the pudding, and we'll wait and we'll see what happens.
But I would not. I think the way to end this is, I don't blame anybody for being skeptical, but it's the gnashing of teeth. It's never going to be, if you're that committed to that position, good on you. But I just don't have the energy for that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a
I think
tantrum.
it's unhealthy.
Yeah,
and I think that, unfortunately, this is a hobby filled with folks like that for whatever reasons. And we'll move on. So I've talked about this on the show. GaryCon has a charity auction every year, and the charity auction raises money for charities that are chosen by Luke. We've raised money for Wounded Warrior Project in the past, and then when Wounded Warrior, their CEO's salary and some other things came to light, we moved away, and we 4 years ago, we started working with Children's Wisconsin and Extra Life. Children's Wisconsin is the Children's Hospital Network of Wisconsin. We've had a lot of good success, and we've raised an extraordinary amount of money for Children's Wisconsin. We raised $93,000 last year, and that $93,000, I didn't think we could ever top that. At the end of last year's GaryCon, I asked, and after years and years, Luke finally gave me the chance to hang myself and be in charge of the charity auction. And I got to put together just an amazing team of people. Tim McMiniman, Josh Pop, Bill Meinhardt, and I, plus a number of others, really sort of tackled this about what we would like to see in the charity auction, what would we like to change, and so on and so forth. And so we've spent the last year trying to execute on that with an unspoken goal that we'd like to hit $100,000 if we could. That's a pretty steep order. And to understand why, you should know that the charity auction is literally all donations. What we get from people, and I would say 85-90% of it is stuff that you guys would all have in your closets and donate. It's pretty spectacular that we have been able to be as successful as we are. Now, we do have some high-end items. We had 2 paintings from Jeff Easley this year. We had the Errol Otis project that I had alluded to. But we really tried to put a lot of things in play. We created a silent auction for GaryCon this year. It did very well. We'll be expanding on that next year. I think the thing that last year's, the person who spoke before the auction was a kid named Oliver, and I've talked about this on the show. Oliver caught strep and then caught a rare affliction that left him paralyzed and on a trach tube when he came to GaryCon last year. And he talked about what he had been through in the work of Children's Hospital. In the year since, Oliver has relearned how to walk. And he walked up at the start of the show, and it was pretty spectacular. He gave a great speech talking about the work of Children's. And then we were off to the races, because the problem is our donors are so generous. Last year I had 180 items for 3 hours. This year I had 190 something. And we were flying. I did, I think, 75 items in the first hour. But it's a bountiful, it's a banquet of riches. We have donations like Oliver did a painting, and then Errol Otis remarked it. So it's the only collaboration that Errol has ever done. We had the 2 Jeff Easley paintings. We had the one of Melf that Vince Vaughn bought and gave to Luke. Then we had another one of a gold dragon with a lich on the back of it. If you can figure out how that happened, I'd be willing to entertain it. And I think that once it all started rolling, we had a second Stearns D&D pinball machine this year, and interestingly, by the end of the second hour, we were at about $57,000, and I just wasn't sure how we were going to get anywhere near to the goal that we sort of wanted. And I didn't take into account what was going to happen next, right? So we sold the pinball machine for $10,000. We'll have a list of all the items and the prices realized. It'll go up at some point here in the next week or so. I just have to get the final sign off to do that. But we had a couple items that didn't make it to the auction. So one of them is the regular Artist Jam. For whatever reason, that didn't get delivered the way it was supposed to, and you know, I'm responsible indirectly, but I'll take the lumps for it. I thought I had sorted that out with a round of text messages, and somebody just didn't come through on that. So how do you donate for the auction? We literally have people, like Thursday morning, I stood in front of empty shelves panicking because there was nothing there. And by Friday, I had over 200 items. And so people just bring things, they donate them, they go through their closets. Great story. Guy donated a true first printing of the DMG, and it was signed by a bunch of people. Didn't have Gary's signature, but we went around and got a bunch of other special guests to sign it, and it sold for $5,000. Holy crap. And so by the time we got towards the end, you know, one of the things that we always sell every year is the Sandal of Gygax. You win it. It's a sandal that Gary made, and you get to keep it for a year. You get bragging rights. You get to put your name on a little panel, and you go get to have a great time with it. But the next to last item we sold was Wizards of the Coast donated a trip for 5 people to be flown out, hotel and airfare paid for, flown out to Wizards, get a full behind the scenes tour, and play in a series of games of D&D with people at WotC, and have your characters enshrined in an upcoming product. So I had no idea. What we were going to see as far as action on this. I had a thought of my mind, like how much would somebody pay for? You do the, you know, reverse out the airfare, reverse out the hotels, blah, 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 blah. What would this work out to be? Yeah, it didn't matter. It hit $30,000. And so $124,000 is where the auction ended up. Now, Jen asked, where did we end on the silent auction? And I'll be glad to tell you. The silent auction raised over $3,000. And if the artist jam piece sells for what it normally sells for, and we're going to do an online auction for that, we very well may have hit 100K without the WotC donation. But right now it's responsible for carrying us to not just 100, but to 100.
Can I say one thing real quick, Jim? I don't know why more conventions and auctions don't use the silent auction, because it would help a lot. And I am really glad. I don't know if this is your doing or whatever, but I'm glad that GaryCon did this, because there's nothing more of a time waste than auctioning off a bunch of $5 items in an auction. And that's a, I don't know why people don't use the silent auction more, because it really is helpful. And it allows you to spend more time dealing with the items that are going to get more money and for the charity. And it allows the people out there to also not have to wait, because look, nothing puts you to sleep quicker than auctioning off 15 $1 Judges Guild items in a row.
Well, yeah. And I think, it's very interesting. I got pushed back. For 4 years, I've wanted to do silent auctions to take stuff out of the live auction to put it through that way.
Right.
And for 4 years, 3 different people told me no. And so this year I was in charge. So we said yes. and with that, we put 100 items. We put 100 items through the silent auction. And in doing so, the most standout interesting thing to me was we got a big stack of print-on-demand books. Like we got 6 copies of the Dragonlance Adventures, or 8 copies of it, a bunch of copies of C1, a bunch of, so on and so forth. We ran around and got Margaret Weiss to autograph all the Dragonlance books. We got Alan Hammock to write answers. We got people to sign these. So we put together lots in the silent auction. So our silent auctions ran 2 hours, not 4 hours, 6 hours, 2 hours. And we had a slate of 5 auctions every 2 hours. And every one of the slates of auctions had 3 print-on-demand books, 2 of which were signed. One by Margaret, one was Zeb Cook, one was Alan Hammock, whatever. But there were 2 out of the 3 books were signed. And they averaged $150 a piece for print-on-demand copies. Right? That you could have walked around GaryCon and gotten Margaret to sign your stuff. Or you could have got, nope, this was just an easy way to do this and an easy way to act on this.
Smart.
2 hours? Why 2 hours? Well, frankly, I have a lot of stuff and I needed to see it find new homes. And it creates a little bit of FOMO, right? A little bit of fear of missing out. We raised $3,300, I think, through silent auctions is what I remember. We did 40 auctions on Thursday, 40 on Friday, and we did 20 on Saturday.
It's just such an underused option, because I know a lot of times you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings that donated they make a donation and you look at it, you're like, it's a bunch of really average stuff. We really appreciate what you're doing for us, but you don't want to tell them, look, this is just not the quality of item we want in the regular auction.
No, I think I would put it a different way, Mike. I think I would put it a different way. I think that what I would say is every donation is important. Every single donation is important. But like Dan's talking about the location was for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was its proximity to the operations desk, so that somebody could go over and very quickly collect the clipboard sheets for the ending auctions, put out the sheets for the new ones, then pull the items out of the cabinet and deal with that expediently. If we had put it somewhere else, it would have been a larger pain in the backside to do something with, and we just couldn't. And it worked fine. I'm going to tell you right now, it worked fine. They didn't need to be by the lobby. That's literally 10 minutes away from ops. And they didn't need to be by the main lobby bar. They just did not need to be there. We could do a preview, I guess, but they were right where they needed to be.
If you wanted to find them, you found them, right?
That's right. That's right. And the success of the silent auction is probably going to draw more people to go look for it next year. If we had sold half as much as we had done through the silent auction, it still would have been a win, and we won. It was great. I think that that the silent auction played out very, very well. So all in $124,000. It's the most we've ever raised. It's the most the gaming community has raised at a charity auction at a game convention, I believe, ever. Last year, I had never heard of anybody coming close to $100,000 at Gen Con or even Spiel or some of the others. I don't know anybody that hit 124. I think we're in a rarefied atmosphere that has never. We're at a new plateau, and I say that, like, don't get me wrong. I want to do a victory lap, right? The entire team of people did a lot of work this past year to make this successful, but yeah, as the guy on the mic, I'm very, very proud of the work we all collectively did, right? It was because I'm one guy on a microphone and I got 9 people hopping and moving and grooving behind me to try to make everything happen. So spectacular. Children's Hospital is stunned. The president of their foundation was there. Extra Life, the national representative, was there. They just couldn't believe what they were seeing. It's replicable, like the strategy is replicable. But of course, far be it from the gaming community to let you have a moment of success because they want to chime in. So let me share with you an email that I received.
Oh, it's gonna be so delicious.
And actually, I shit you not, I just got a text from Dan Ayub. So that's good.
I heard you ripping me. I heard Ty's ripping
right.
me.
So I got this email. Now, the best part of this email, I was not aware of it until one of the folks on the auction team pointed it out to me. And this email was sent before the first hour of the auction was over. So you can hear this in your favorite Simpsons comic book shop guy voice. Incompetence. The description of the auction says, check the list of items online and provides no link to the website you didn't post. Disappointment continues. And disappointment is misspelled. So what he's referencing was, at different times in the last 10 years, somebody has asked me to take pictures of items and put them up on the on a page somewhere for people to see. I killed myself one year to do this, and nothing came of this. Like, we didn't see an increase in bids, we didn't see an increase in activity, and so we did highlight some of the experiences that we had put together and some of the things that we were going to be auctioning off, but we took it down as we got closer to the show. And this guy sends this email out to the auction team literally before the first hour of it is over. And don't get me wrong, when I do $124,000 and set a new all-time record, I don't really feel like we're incompetence, but I guess I could be wrong. I don't know.
But Jim, you could have made $125,000. Don't you understand?
I guess I could have, but I did not. So I'm the first guy that will beat myself up over the stuff that we got wrong. The artist jam should have been in the auction, and I trusted somebody that I guess I shouldn't have trusted. Burn me once, shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me. I know that there were some foibles. I would love to be able to put pictures up of everything. But let's think about this for a second. Thursday morning, I had hardly anything. I had a couple of boxes that had been sent to us by Wizards of the Coast. I was panicking a little by Thursday afternoon. I think if you had seen me, I was a little queasy. By Friday morning, I had over 200 items. And now what you're talking about is you've got to get somebody to actually take a picture, a decent picture, and try to have a description. And the sheer volume of what that means is almost impossible to meet. And I think that's tough. Now, Ty just raises a great point. Why don't you bring Ty's most recent comment up? And I think there's Ty's missing something here. I think Ty's missing something. So Ty says, I wish Ayub the best. Awesome. I just don't think he has the power or ability to fire most of the WotC workforce. Come back to that second, which is what real course correction will require, in my honest opinion. So Ty is slightly missing the boat, right? I don't believe that Dan Ayub can just randomly. I think there's all sorts of laws that prevent Dan from wandering in and saying, nope, 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 gone, 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 gone.
Right.
You can do whatever. But there's a very valuable lesson to be learned in whatever job place you have, which is when you have people who have perhaps hung on to their job for whatever reason, the easiest way to get these people to leave is by making them work and holding them accountable. And I'm not saying that came up in conversation on Thursday night.
Wink,
It
wink.
came up in conversation on Thursday night, and there was a lot of laughter, because I think that's not lost on anybody, because really and truly, if I was working at Wizards of the Coast right now and I had been okay comfortable during 5.0, and then I thought I was truly aligned with the powers that be during 5.5, as I said, there was an immediate moment in his first week of employment. And that moment laid out very clearly for all staff that there was a new sheriff in town. And if you don't think that there was some universal puckering, somebody made a decision. He saw the aftermath of that decision, and he immediately moved in a different direction than that decision. And that pretty much said there's a sea change coming. And my guess is that there are probably people who've been comfortable at Wizards of the Coast that as soon as their feet get held to the fire, and they start having to do things, and they start having to justify department expenditure and so on, I think there'll be changes. I just do. And I'm sorry, I'll get back to the auction. So I'm incredibly proud. I'm very thrilled that Luke and Bushra have given me enough reign to let me make the auction better. I was entrusted with some fabulous people. I got to work with some fabulous people over this past year. We're going to expand the team to add a couple more real shining stars. Excuse me, Miriam Gygax has stepped up and taken over one of the aspects of the auction, the checkout booth. I will not say that it went perfectly. I think we're 90% of the way there. But as I said in a reply to somebody on one of the GaryCon Facebook pages, we're not 50% of the way there. We had a $124,000 auction. We are 90% of the way there, and we're still fine tuning the machine, right? We're still trying to get the timing right. We're checking the gaps on the spark plugs, whatever analogy works for you. And I don't chase perfection. I can't expect an auction to be perfect. What I can do is I can try to eliminate as many variables as possible and just make it better. And I think that our success this year is from where we all took a look at the auctions that had been and what we wanted to do and how to apply that, and that's what came of it. And I'm very proud. I'm very proud of the auction team. I'm thrilled that we've delivered the amount of money to Children's Hospital and Extra Life that we did. I don't have any hubris in this. I know it's been a team effort all year long. I'm the guy that talks for 3 hours, and I'm the guy that pushes people for money for Children's Hospital and Extra Life during that auction. But we couldn't do it without, there's all the pieces of the puzzle here. GaryCon lets us have the venue, and we're in a bar, and it's awesome. We have unbelievable, generous donations coming in from the community at large. They're big, they're small. The first printing, DMSG, somebody had to make the conscious decision to put it into the auction, and they did. And we ran around and got a bunch more signatures on it to make it more valuable. Bidders, we would not have $124,000 if it wasn't for people bidding. A really interesting story. So Jewel's son, Case, is, I believe, 14 years old, and this was his first GaryCon. His godfather brought him. Thought it would be good for him. I think there's a lot of lessons just in that sentence. And Case wanted to do something for the charity auction. and he wanted to auction off. He wanted to donate to the auction one of his mom's guitars that she would customize for the winter.
What?
And so, like, I had heard whisperings about this, but I wasn't really sure what was going on. And then on Saturday morning, I got a chance to meet him, and he looks exactly like what you would think Jules' 14-year-old son would look like. He was awesome. He was just great. He was funny. He was really like, and I said, well, when you get up, I said, why don't we make it a little skit? And he's like, okay. So we got him up on stage, or we got him up in this front, and I said, hey, everybody, I said, Case, say hi to everybody, Case, you go through it. And I said, what are we going to do today, Case? And he says, well, I want to donate one of my mom's guitars to the auction. And I said, oh, well, that's great. I said, but does she know you're going to do this? Maybe you ought to ask for permission. And he goes, yeah, I think I probably ought. I said, okay. So then he tries to call her on FaceTime, and she's like somewhere hiking in the Midwest or in the mountains. And he's like, he couldn't get her. So he had to go stand off to the side. And then he gets her. And the best part is on FaceTime, it's Jewel, sweaty on a hike. And so I get the microphone up, and so lo and behold, I was like, hi, is this Case's mom? She's like, yes. I said, hey, your son wants to donate one of your customized guitars to our auction. She says, oh, absolutely. And I said, wait a minute. Are you Jewel, 20 million albums selling, 4 Grammy Award nominated winner of The Masked Singer, Jewel? And she goes, I am. And I was like, Case's mom has got it going on. And everybody cracks up. And then we sold it for $2,000.
Wow.
$2,000. And it was won by somebody who, it turns out, is a gigantic Jewel fan, which is great. I think that's spectacular.
I have enough money squirreled away that I might buy a Jewel guitar because I could afford that. But I don't know what I would do with it afterwards. But it just, I mean, how many of those are there floating around out there?
She does a few a year for causes. Yeah. And
it's pretty cool.
Really and truly, one of the most interesting things about this is that, he wants to come back. Like, we might have another one. I don't know. And this is what makes planning an auction like this so hard, is that you just don't know what you're going to get. Like, you just don't know what you're going to get. And that's the challenge, right? To this year might be the very most I've ever raised and will ever raise at an auction. And that's okay, right? Whatever it is, it's still more than the charities had at the start of the show. But I always would, there's an inherent part of you that wants to do better and wants to do more, but you can't always do that. You have to recognize that at some point you'll hit a plateau that you'll not achieve again unless some extraordinary set of circumstances come together. I thought that was last year. It turns out it was this year. But I owe a lot of people a lot of thank yous. We had tremendous donations. And again, I know it doesn't matter to a hill of beans to a lot of folks, but Dan Ayub did not have to put this package together. He did not have to do this, but he chose to, and he chose to donate it to GaryCon. Will he do something similar for the Gen Con charity auction? I don't know. But I think it demonstrates the thing that I always talk about, right? This is the duality of our community, right? 99% of our community is amazing and generous and wants to spend money to help sick kids and is fabulous. And then there's the 1% that sends me that email when I haven't even completed the first hour of the auction because indubitably I have disappointed them.
Ooh, sure. Bad. You're
right.
A bad auction.
Yeah, okay, sure. And again, I take all of this with a grain of salt simply because when I'm standing up and I'm yelling and talking to people and so on, and I'm trying to get bids, I don't think about them.
Right.
I think about kids like Oliver, who spent a year of intensive physical therapy learning how to walk again. And that was through Children's Hospital, Wisconsin. And that's pretty striking. So that's it. That's what I got.
That's pretty, that's pretty amazing. The money, between the money raised there, and then also for those that don't know, Game Hole auction, is they have a huge charity component there too. The
Yes.
money goes to a fund for a good friend of ours. His children have a charity, and also there's also various other charities that Alex has raised money for over the years. So I love to see that stuff because gamers really are some of the best people. They really are, and they will give, and it's just amazing. I mean, these are for the most part not people who you would think would donate a lot of money, but every time I'm always surprised at how much people will spend, for a good cause in our community, from our community.
So we didn't say anything during the auction, and I'll tell you, I thought about that. And in fact, I would say that one of my harshest criticisms of myself is, as I was trying to stay on top of how the auction was first coming together, I got rattled at the start, and it didn't start as smoothly as I normally do, simply because literally right up until 3 o'clock, I had people sort of hitting me from all sides. We had talked about Tim a lot during the show, during GenCon, or I'm sorry, during GaryCon. There was a hat of Tim's that was auctioned off online on one of the GaryCon Facebook pages. Tim cast a long shadow, and in fact, one of the items that we sold was a signed print with Tim's signature on it. That did pretty well. I worked with Frank and Tim behind the scenes, and I did a little bit of auctioneering on one side of the podium while one of the others was on the other side of the podium during GenCon. And then you all know that Tim sort of walked away first, and then Frank walked away a few years later from auctioneering. And in fact, I actually have Frank's gavel. I think I've got Frank's gavel over in a cabinet over to my right, that I bought at GaryCon when he decided to retire, and that was it, and he was walking away. I think that when we lose somebody like Tim, it's hard to process losing somebody like Tim. And it's hard to recognize Tim just because he wore a bunch of hats and he did a lot of things. He was the editor of Dragon Magazine. He was a guy who did not suffer fools. He didn't care if you were smart or you were dumb. He didn't suffer fools. And in some ways, I love that about Tim. And if I try to emulate one thing about Tim, it's that, because my patience for forkwittery is too small to be measured. Tim was a kind, caring, decent human being. And I would say to anybody, watch those old episodes of Grognard in the Basement, and you get a real sense of who Tim was. This is the first GaryCon without Tim, and it's just not the same. One of my favorite Tim stories of the last few years was that Tim would come around on his scooter at GaryCon, and we have a friend who's known Tim for forever and was one of the business partners in Eldritch. And for whatever reason, Tim decided to call him Jeff, and none of us will ever let this person forget it, because his name is not Jeff, but a lot of, hey, you look like a Jeff, which is good fun. But no, we didn't say anything in the auction. I think we did have a moment where we said, missed him. And I missed him. I missed him a lot. But everybody knows, really and truly, let's give Tim credit. Tim knew when to walk away.
Yeah.
And there's a time where I'll need to walk away, and you'll all be thankful. And I appreciate that. But yes, go ahead.
No, I put a link up in the chat. It's the short memorial that was conducted at TotalCon. It's after the show. Grab it now and watch it after the show.
I think you're going to see a lot of Tim feedback, Tim memorial stuff this year. I mean, we don't specifically have something planned for North Texas, but he will definitely be mentioned. We have a North Texas RPG Con Hall of Fame, and these are people who have helped out the con during the years. There's no real criteria except what I decide, and usually it's, have you been a long time member? Have you come to a lot of cons? Have you helped us out? And Tim was part of our inaugural class that we had, the very first one. He's also the second one that's passed away. Janelle passed away a couple of years ago. So we give out our people this year that will be going to the Hall of Fame. Tim will be mentioned definitely because he was a huge part of the early North Texas stuff. He's the one that brought Circus Maximus to the con. He suggested we bring Circus Maximus, and if you've come to North Texas, that's a huge part of the con. My brother learned how to run the game under Tim and took over from Tim. And after Tim retired from running Circus Maximus because it's too damn long. It takes 3 hours. And because he had to have a smoke break every 15 minutes.
Yes, he did.
And so, we'll definitely mention it. But I think you're going to have a lot of mentions of Tim during events this year because he was a huge part of the hobby. And
yes,
and I mean, what can you say? Everybody said what they need to say about the guy, and he's going to be remembered. That's the one thing that you always want is just to be remembered. Good, bad, indifferent, whatever. Everybody's going to remember Tim and what he did for the hobby. So I don't think that there's no onus on you to Jim. You had a lot. You had a lot going on.
Tim would be the first. Tim's perspective on these sort of things was, you were there to do a job, right?
Right.
And the auctioneering was a job. I saw Frank was trying to host people over in Beloit. Frank still is staying away from GaryCon, and that just makes me sad. I wish Frank had not. I wish Frank had not said some of the things he said. I wish that Frank had not done some of the things he did. I think that, I know a lot of the stuff behind the scenes, and I think that it was a solvable situation until Frank decided to double down on some things. And now GaryCon, Frank's going to pass away at some point. I think Frank's been at death's door and has he's sort of taken a look over the abyss and he's been pulled back from it. And I'm very happy about the fact that Frank is alive and can host people over in Beloit.
Oh, yeah.
I just wish that he wasn't over in Beloit. I wish he was at GaryCon. But Frank's the person really in charge of that. He could be at GaryCon, but anyway, I know that there are a lot of people who will. I mean, I was intimately connected with all of this, and I just wish it hadn't happened. I wish it hadn't happened at all.
It sucks because, I don't even want to get into it. Let's don't talk about it. It's just, it sucks.
It does.
It didn't have to happen, and it was. Yeah, I kind of don't even want to start talking about it. It's just too much. But yes, I'll tell this Tim story again. We had Tim over to the warehouse for a game day one time. He was in town visiting. His family lived in Dallas for a while, and he came to town, and he said, "Hey, can I come over there? And we'll have a game day. Come on over, Tim." So I'm not going to do my Tim voice. I love to do my Tim. But he came over and he brought his grandkids, and you wouldn't have known it was Tim Cass because he was quiet and polite and nice. It was like we were seeing the Tim that his family knows, not the Tim that goes to game conventions. And so Doug ran a game for him, and I said, "Well, don't you want to run a game?" No. Let Doug run. So Doug ran a game. The grandkids had a blast. Tim had a blast. And look, I'll tell you, as a grandfather, nothing's more fun than playing games with your grandkids. It really, I mean, and before I die, I'd love to be able to play a game of D&D with my grandkids. Play at the same time. I've run plenty of games for my grandkids, but I've never actually played a game with them. And Tim had a blast. Doug had a blast running them. The grandkids had a blast, and it was just really fun to see Tim in that atmosphere of not having to be Tim Cass. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
He didn't have to put this persona on that I'm a crotchety old guy. He was just being natural and just nice, and it blew me away because I was like, this is not the Tim that I've come to know over the years. But it was just him, unguarded, natural, just with his family, and I figured this is probably how everybody knows him in his family. They know him as this nice old guy that's they don't know him as crotchety Tim Cass, the guy we all knew. They know him as this nice, pleasant, funny old man. And no, that was a really, you look back on fun weekends you have or fun days, and that was one of the ones I'll have to remember in my top 10. That weekend we had a great time at that game day that year with Tim being there. Just, he was telling stories and just him being with his grandkids totally flipped the situation in terms of how he typically is. So it was great. He's a great guy.
Yeah, I think so. I got sideways with him once, and then when he realized the error of the ways, he made the most begrudging half apology, which for Tim Kask was the biggest apology you could ever hope for.
Man,
and that's fine, right? That's neither here nor there.
And whether you know it or not, look, he had if the story, stories that he told and that other people told, he had a huge effect on what we got AD&D first edition. He and Gary went. They had an office and they had cards set up on the walls and and Steve Marsh tells stories about walking in there and they're arguing over rules. What should be in 1E, what's going to be in the player's handbook. Why do we need this? So he had a huge effect on the game that we actually, ended up playing and loving. Maybe he doesn't get enough credit in a lot of circles. I don't think he does in some way.
So
I mean, we know who he is because we're intimate into the hobby.
Yeah, but are you saying that we can blame Tim for the unarmed combat rules?
I don't. If I remember correctly, I think he argued against that. Once he argued against armor class against weapons, and I'd probably I know he argued against armor class versus weapons. He thought that was fiddly, but that was Gary's baby. Gary was like, all the pole arms and this and that, and Frank and
so many pole arms.
Who cares about that? Nobody gives a damn about all these pole arms.
I need a whole section on pole arms.
No, I don't care about pole arms so much. Why is there a Bill Goose Army and a Glaive Goose Army? Oh my God! But so we probably know more about his influence in the hobby than most people. But yeah, he was a great guy. He'll be missed. Look, he got sideways with me and Eric a few times too. Eric famously with Eric a couple of times, but part of his charm.
I told, if you watch the video that I linked, you'll get the more entertaining version of the story. But at Gamehole, I'm walking. I don't know where I was walking to. Probably the bathroom. I have to work on the table with Mike, and I get stopped by Tim Kask, and Tim's like, I gotta have a word with you. And he starts to berate me because I'm not paying him what he's worth per word. And I'm like, what the? And what do you think? I think I work for nothing? This is an insult. And I'm like, what the? And then Jim Wampler comes up from behind and just says, Eric, just walk away. Just walk away.
That's right.
And then afterwards he goes, Wampa goes, it's the chemo. He thought that you were Bill Webb.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not wearing pajamas.
You get chemo brain. I know chemo brain.
Yeah, I experienced it. Oh God, almost 20 years ago. But yes, I was like, okay. And then after that, we were good.
Yep.
I didn't think I was Bill anymore. Oh man.
You can't make these stories up. That's the best.
We need a boule. Yes, we do.
I always loved it when some pinhead on the internet would try to correct Tim on the pronunciation of boule. That was, I mean, it took a special kind of dumb to do that, but it was always fun when it was on display.
By the way, trivia note: Tim had the first TPK at North Texas, first year. Second time he ran Temple of the Weaver Queen. His quote afterwards was, "I've never seen worse saving throws rolled than that party," because apparently Lich cast a spell at the end. The first time he ran the game, more than half the party made their saves and they were able to defeat the Lich. I think this time one person made their save and it was done. It was over. I've never seen worse saving throws in my entire life. So he was the first TPK. I'll always remember that. So
I liked Tim a lot. Tim was.
But we'll remember. Yeah, like I said, this year they'll the conventions that I'm sure WizardCon, because Don's connection with Tim will have something, and I know we'll talk about him a little bit at North Texas, and just just once again, what do we always tell you guys? Go to conventions, meet these guys, say hi to them, tell them you respect them, and you love what they did. Shake their hand because they're not always going to be around.
I had 10 minutes with Alan Hammock at GaryCon in the midst of my frantic.
Is that anything like 6 Minutes in Heaven?
Oh my God, Mike, I was going to say the same joke.
I beat you to it. I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
Oh God.
I had a good 10 minutes with Alan Hammock. And I said,
Yes, it was. All right.
one of the great joys of coming to conventions over the last few years is that I've gotten to know Alan really well. And there's going to be a convention at some point in the future where Alan won't be there anymore. And I'm just sick. I'm just absolutely sick of that notion. And so
I just talked to Alan the other day, and I said, you better not have gotten sick at GaryCon because you have to come to North Texas this year. Well, Mike, I've told you before, North Texas will be the last con that I scratch off my list someday. I said, well, you will be coming here if we have to charter a jet for you and hook up a hospital bed. This will be the last con you go to. Yes. So he promised me that he would drop every other con before North Texas. So I believe him too, because he has a blast in Texas. I love me some Alan Hammock. He's great
Yep.
dude.
Yeah, I just you got to get him to run Boot Hill. You got to get him to run all the Alan Hammock usuals. But no, I think I'm hopeful. I'm at heart. I'm a hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of guy. I think all the stuff I saw in GaryCon makes me feel good about our hobby. I think I heard a lot of positive things that I want to believe are going to happen. I think they will. Will they be enough for some people? Not a chance.
No.
I think though that it's very different. I think it's very different from what it has been, and I think that's good in a very positive way. I think that our community still delivers time and time again. The auction this past week is classic example of that. I don't know how in the world we'll ever top it, but we'll see.
By the way, I saw the award this year. Gygax Award went to Ed Greenwood,
who did actually make a fellatiating joke about the microphone, which is pure Ed. And in fact, I did actually bring up with Ed's handler my, shall we say it, inappropriate personal experience with Ed, who he just sort of shook his head and goes, "Yeah." I said, "Yep." So
I hope to have a nice long conversation with him at EdCon this year. I think I'm gonna try to get him to come to North Texas in the future. I see what I can do. Throw my hat in the ring there. See if I can get him to come, because I've talked to enough people over the years. They said that would be a game changer. They would love to see it, and I think he would like North Texas. There's a certain je ne sais quoi about North Texas. I think fits in.
Yes, that would be the serving girls. I wouldn't let Ed anywhere near the serving girls without a reminder on each side.
There's got to be
both of them with cattle prods.
Oh yeah, there's got to be a barrier there. You're absolutely correct. Yeah. But no, I was glad for Ed, because Ed, look, if you don't know the Ed Greenwood story, he was a big D&D fan. I think his first article in Dragon was published in Dragon 39. He published articles about this crazy place called Forgotten Realms, and I would read Dragon magazine and go, man, that sounds like the coolest campaign world ever. And he would publish the gods and stories and different rule stuff. He always had a great take. His articles were always great. And when they were looking for a new D&D world, he sent this giant box of crap to all the guys there. And I can't remember who exactly. If it was Jim Ward who got the box. I can't remember who exactly got the box. I know, but I can't remember. And they're like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you had this much stuff." And very famously, Forgotten Realms was chosen as the second big campaign world for D&D, and the rest is history, because the Gray Box came out in 1987, sold like hotcakes, and then it was a Forgotten Realms world for the next 10 years or so. The novels started coming out. The novels were basically, from what I understand, talking to James Louder and a few other people, the novels kept TSR going for years because
Yeah.
they were selling so well. The Moonshade trilogy from Douglas Niles went through like 48 printings. I mean, and then of course R.A. Salvatore came with Drist, and that's a whole nother, money wagon for TSR. And so, and Ed did not get paid a lot for this. He sold this. Now he got to work for TSR and published quite a bit and became his own published author in his own right.
New York Times best-selling author.
But the millions of dollars that TSR and WotC have made off Forgotten Realms of the years, Ed has seen a very tiny part of that because just through his connection to the hobby. But every time I've talked to him at a convention or seen him, he seems like he's perfectly okay with his lot in life. And so I'm glad for him. Glad that he got that award because he was a huge part of TSR's success in the 90s. A huge part. If you weren't gaming in the 90s, you owned an Ed Greenwood product. It was either a campaign box set, it was a setting, it was a novel, it was a supplement. You owned something written by Ed, and it was probably really, really good.
I think it's fascinating when you think back about that period of time, right? They published Forgotten Realms in 87. Dark Sun follows along. When did Dark Sun come out? 1990, 91, somewhere
I think
there.
Spelljammer, Ravenloft was 1989, 1990. So that was the next one.
It was Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, Spelljammer,
1990, yeah.
Dark Sun, Planescape. 5 incredibly different, mind-altering, and let's say that the weakest was Spelljammer. Let's say that the most evocative was Ravenloft. Let's say the densest to try to get into was Planescape because Burke. But when you think about what TSR, we all bag on Lorraine, but when you think about what TSR managed to accomplish in that space of time of 10 years, it's a pretty staggering run. Because I would say that the people watching this show, I would say that any one of those 5 has a strong connect. You probably have a strong connection to at least one of those worlds.
But you have to remember also, if for some reason, I remember the summer of 87 when Forgotten Realms box set came out. If that had been a dud, who knows where we would have been in the 90s with TSR. I mean, it might have gone under way earlier than that. It was not a dud. It sold like crazy. It did so well.
And it fed the fiction. Yeah.
And I mean, if it was good, and it was really, really good. Yeah, I still say it's one of the best sandboxes TSR ever published because it's basically a sandbox. Here's a campaign world. Here's some gods. Here's some countries. They're all different. Here's an Egyptian country, and here's one with evil mages, and there's one that's this. And he just threw it all in the box, and all you needed was that box, and you could have gamed forever with just that box without anything else. And that was just the magic of Ed. Ed had so many ideas. I remember talking to him. And I mean, I've got flack for this, but I think of all the creative people that have worked for TSR, I think Gary and I think Ed's right there with all of them because he was able to take an idea and turn it into an amazing product. I remember I was talking about one of the lesser known products he did, which is a module called the Haunted Halls of Evening Star, which is kind of a beginning level, kind of a B1 type, B1, B2 type module. It comes with there's a little village and that describes a little bit of the area. And then there's this dungeon and it only has like one level. And so when I saw him at a convention a few years back, I mentioned that. I said, that's one of my favorite. I had him actually sign it for me. So it's one of my favorite adventures. I've run into quite a few times. He said, well, it was actually twice as big because I overwrite. He said, I actually did a whole giant thing on the town and I did a second level to the dungeon and I did all these encounters outside there and I turned it in and they said, Ed, this is too much. And they cut half of it out. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, do you still have that half? Because I have it and I hope someday they publish the whole thing. I said, well, if they don't, I'm gonna get in touch with you. I want you to send it to me because I would love to run that. But that he wrote, man. The guy wrote and wrote and wrote, and he just had so many ideas in his head. It's crazy. I mean, the whole Ruins of Undermountain, which is one of my favorite products ever by TSR. It got a lot of flack because, well, there's all this empty space and there's not enough adventures. Well, I saw an interview with Ed. Ed had filled in all those spaces. They said, it's too much, Ed. We can't have that much stuff. I mean, the box set would have been this thick. So they pulled a lot of it out. And not only that, it's famously only the first 3 levels of Undermountain. Undermountain is 9 levels deep.
Yeah.
And so first of all, I told Ed, we can only do the first 3 levels. And by the way, you've written out 800 rooms. We can only have 55. So we're going to cut out, 90% of the room. So he was just one of those guys, just amazingly creative and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And most of the stuff he wrote was really good. Now his writing skills, I've read better fantasy than what Ed wrote. But his D&D, creative skills were amazing. I'll tell you, he did something in Polyhedron magazine, and it's going to kill me. I don't remember. He said it was a setting. He goes, I'm going to create a setting. It was one of those things like, how do you create settings? And so he said, I'm going to do this setting. And 3 issues of Polyhedron magazine. He spent 2 pages for the 3 issues, and he created this setting. And it was a veil. It was a veil with a mage's tower. And in those, I swear to God, in those 3 issues and in those 6 or 8 pages, he created just offhand, probably Ed drinking a beer one night, thinks this up. He created one of the best settings I've ever read for an adventure. And I always would go back to that as proof of Ed's genius. The fact he just said, I'm just going to create this setting. There was a mage, the tower there. There was the dwarves that ruled the veil, and the mage came to him and said, I know this is your veil. Can I set up a tower here? And the dwarf said, if you pull out one of your eyes right now. And the guy pulled his eye out. And the dwarfs were so impressed. They're like, well, hell yeah, buddy. You can put a mage tower in there. You're a badass, dwarf. And so the mage was called something the One Eye. And so he had this tower there, and he described a little village. And so he just goes to these details. And by the time you're through with the 3 issues of Polyhedron and the 6 or 8 pages, you've got an entire setting you could run adventures in. That was Ed's genius. Do stuff like that. And the only person that I knew that could do things like that was Gary Gygax. Gary Gygax could set up a setting like that and just say, in 2 or 3 paragraphs or 3 pages, create a setting. They're just like, wow, I really want to adventure in this setting. And Ed had that magic too, or he has that magic. I mean, he's able to do that. He's able to just in a few pages create something that you're like, man, I would love to adventure in this world.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so fascinating, right? Is that we do have these people that come into our hobby and turn things upside down with their just tremendous creativity, and that's what makes it all so glorious, right? Kelsey is a more recent example, but we can go back through whatever genre, and all of those folks leave a mark in a long series of ripples on the pond. Ed's getting older, and I just, we're going to be losing more and more folks over the course of the next few years. They're not young men anymore. They're not young women anymore. We lost Gene Robbie, Margaret Weiss. The day is going to come where we won't have Margaret Weiss anymore. And that's going to just, it's going to hurt. It's just going to hurt in a lot of ways. Larry Elmore was not at GaryCon this year. His son-in-law was there, but he wasn't.
We've lost people in North Texas just because travel. I mean, Jeff Easley, who we love, Jeff Easley. We had a couple really frank conversations last year. He's just not going to travel anymore. It's not just our convention; it's just any convention around there. He's just, his knees messed up, and he doesn't want to travel. He doesn't have to. And if you saw
make it to GaryCon, and he's good.
And he goes to EggCon and GaryCon. That's it. And if you want to see him, that's where you're going to have to go now. And pretty soon, all these guys their circles are going to shrink smaller and smaller. Where I'm only going to this con, I'm only traveling here. That's why we like to get these guys in North Texas. We don't know how much longer some of these guys can come to North Texas. I mean, Tim Kask, the last year he came, he told us that was going to be the last year. I don't like to. His family had moved away from Dallas, so he didn't have a lot of reason to come to that area. And one of the things he loved about going to North Texas is he spent the next week with his family always.
Right.
And he just said, look, guys, physically, I'm just not really able to do it. I only really came because my family was in Dallas, but now that they're not here, and we understood, we're like, he's not a young man, or he wasn't a young man. So, see these guys when you can. And as long as we can have them at North Texas, we will. I mean, we love having Darlene and Alan Hammock and Jeff D and these old, the many as the old timers as we can get. I mean, Zeb Cook, we will have them as long as we can. But at a certain point, it's going to roll over, and the oldest person there is going to be, Eric, me, and Jim. We're going to be the old timers, and the people younger than us are going to be the big stars. I remember I made Jeff Delaney laugh years ago. I said, at a certain point, we're going to be turning over the hobby to youngsters like you. He goes, Mike, I'm like 50 years old. I'm not young. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. You're not young either. But the hobby's going to be in younger hands eventually. And so, while we can, we're going to spend as much time as we can with the old folks and talk to them and hear their stories. And, I love hearing the stories. That's the biggest, the biggest thing. Jim and I, a couple years ago, spent some time with Darlene. She had brought a bunch of stuff to be auctioned off. And so we sat with her and she told us a story about every single item. And she's a bawdy lass, isn't she, Jim? She's not the proper.
I feel like there's nothing safe to say in this other than she really, really, really liked Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, maybe a little too much, but he was a cute guy in the 70s. I don't know, but yes, it was fun just to hear her talking. That was the Star Trek cards collection she had. She was a member of the Star Trek fan club, but it turns out Star Trek fan club, kind of like the Beatles fan club, every Star Trek member had their own little thing. And I think Chekhov was the big one, and then Nimoy. Chekhov and Nimoy were the two that she really, really enjoyed a lot. So she told us about that too, how much she enjoyed them. Chicka-pow!
If Darlene was happy, I'm happy for Darlene.
But just talking to her was just great. Just hearing her tell little stories about every item we would bring up, and the map of Greyhawk, and it was just really nice to sit with her, and she would actually say a swear word and say, "Oh, I'm sorry." And
my God, when she swore the first time, I just was cracking up. It was just great.
So yeah,
you're not expecting like career sailor language to come out of Darlene.
Darling, but it's worth it. Just spend some time. And I had to tell you what's cool. Take them to lunch. Offer to take them to lunch. They'll probably go. Those guys they don't turn down free food, man. If you're at a convention,
I was telling this story today. I have not one, but two Larry Elmore sketches in my player's handbook from when I was a kid. Hold on.
Here we go.
Sorry. So
he's gonna big time us right here.
So Larry Elmore is a guy who likes bourbon, and I'm a guy who likes bourbon. So Larry, one time,
hold on.
I got
big in that, Gary.
I got Larry to draw that in my player's handbook, right? And it cost me a fairly good chunk of bourbon. However, about a year after that, I was walking by Larry, and Larry goes, "Hey Jim, you got any of that good bourbon with you?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I'll tell you what. I'll draw a sketch in your book if you want. I'll draw a sketch for you." I said, "Sure, Larry." So I came back with the bourbon in my player's handbook, which is why I have two sketches by Larry Elmore.
Oh my God.
Right. And the best part is he goes, "I didn't realize I'd drawn one for you." And I said, "I'm not going to take the bourbon away from you, Larry." He goes, "Oh, thank God." And then he starts.
You can have another. Yeah, you can still have the bourbon. I just want another sketch now.
So nice. It pays to get to know folks, right? It really does. And I'm sorry, I'll say this real quick. So this has been my labor of love forever, right? I've got tons of autographs. I've got, et cetera, et cetera. This is essentially like the book we sold. Mine's a 6 or 8 printing or whatever player's handbook, and it's sealed behind that awful, terrible plastic wrap you put on things to, the adhesive side to preserve it. But this one's mine. And And if you have your player's handbook or you have your DM's guide for when you were a kid, you can do a lot worse than to have one of your idols autograph it and so
Mhm.
on. I've been working on this for 10 plus years, 15 years, and I'm thrilled I have it. I'm genuinely just thrilled that I've gone ahead and done this. I don't have Gary's autograph. I'll always regret that, but I've got a lot of others that mean something to me, and I would suggest if you have it, you should do it because you'll just when they're gone, you'll at least have the memories.
I have I used to run a B1 game every year in North Texas. By the way, I'm running it again this year. It already sold out, so I'm
It always
excited.
sells
I'm
out.
excited to come back to B1.
Yeah,
But
thanks, Gary, for having the sign up while I'm busy.
But I have a set of rule books that I put on the table. If anybody wants to look for the rules while we're playing, the BX rules, I can pull them out. One year I had Errol playing my game, and so I had him sign the cover of all the books are signed, and so I still use them. So when we play, I put them on the table, and I always wait for that one guy to pull the thing and see the EO in the corner. Did Errol Otis sign this? Yes, he did. And I just think that's so cool because then people are like, that is so cool. This is the rule book. Yeah, that's the rule book that he signed. And if you want to look through it, please don't steal it. But if you want to look through while we play, but that's what they're there for. I got them signed by him so I could have them at the table, and somebody that comes there could pull it out and say, hey, here's a signed Errol Otis rule book I can use to look up the rules of this game. So I love it when you can just get them to sign things that mean something to you.
Yeah.
I've got a slab B1. It's a 5.5, which is average condition, but it's signed by Darlene on the cover. She did the Darlene thing, so it means something to me. I think it's cool to have a Darlene signed, B1 cover. I probably should get a nicer one for her to sign though. When I see her I think I bought one. Maybe I see her at WizardCon. I get her to sign another one. So we'll see. But yeah, I love having these guys sign stuff because it makes me smile when I'm flipping through a module. The other day I had a I1 Forbidden City, and I was like, this is in pretty nice condition. I wonder what it, I flipped the page, and Errol Otis, because I remember I had him, and then it suddenly hit me. I told him to sign it. He didn't sign it. He drew a picture in the front cover of a monster, and he said, this is a monster that I wanted to put in, that I wanted to draw a picture of on the cover. And whoever Dave or Zeb Cook said, well, that monster's not in the book. No, I don't want you. And that's why he has the cover. They're fighting bullywugs, I think. And so he goes, oh, I wanted to put this monster in. And so I gave Zeb the idea, and he didn't use my idea. So he drew the monster in the cover. And so it's a unique item that I'm never going to get rid of ever.
Right.
But I forget it's just in a bag. And every once in a while I come across it. I'm like, what is this? And it's the same thing every time. I pull it out and go, what is this I1 doing in here? I don't think I ever got this signed. And I flip it open. Zeb Cook signed the inside, and Errol Otis says drawing. And I go, oh, that's why it's there. And I put it back in there, and I put it up again. But it's just so fun to come across that and see that. And then of course I have to hope that, after I pass away, nobody takes it, throws it in the half price book pile, and doesn't at least open it up and look at it. Which is, by the way, something that Jim and I will probably talk about this year.
Well, the
seminar
has been approved for Game Hole, so it's on at Game Hole. That's our
we can do it in North Texas too, and so
yeah. I think Mike, I don't have a single thing movie wise. I barely can talk. So what do you got?
I've got. Let me do my music then. From last week, I have returning the greatest Romantics greatest hits. Has songs from all 4 of their albums. Of course, you've all heard What I Like About You and Talking in Your Sleep, but they had a lot of great hits besides that. Good stuff. From last week, I said I had never listened to this album. This is Pete Yorn's second album. I loved his first album. This is growing on me. It's okay. Not as good as first album, but it's really, really good. If you like, it's basically 90s rock. If you like 90s alternative rock, you'd like this. 3 new ones this week. This is a recent Ryan Adams album. I'm a huge Ryan Adams fan. And I'm going to say this has not grabbed me yet. I think it's okay, but there's nothing on here that I'm just like, man, this is a great Ryan Adams song. And I'm a huge Ryan Adams fan. I might give it one more week to see if anything, but if not, I'm going to move on. But I like almost everything Ryan Adams done. Just it's not that great. A band from the 1960s. This band was called Love. They were a band based in San Francisco. They had 3 really good albums. And the band, as most bands did in the 60s, they fought with each other. And half the band was on heroin, and the other half were on an ego trip, and they broke up. But they're very famous for they're one of the first multicultural bands. The lead singer and writer was black. I think there was another black person in the band, but they basically were one of the very, very first multicultural rock bands. Their big hits were there's a song called Alone Again, or it was featured in the movie Rushmore. Their songs are featured in a lot of soundtracks because there's a lot of people remember them fondly. It's a very, very good album. It's a psychedelic album. It's on Rolling Stone's list of 100 best albums of all time. It's probably one of the better psychedelic albums of the 60s. It's really, really good stuff. And this is my I just picked this up this week. I think I had a copy a long time ago. Singer-songwriter Lucinda Williams. This is an album called Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. It's considered one of the best albums of the last 30 years. And I had never heard it all the way through. It is absolutely effing amazing. She does country rock. This is like her 4th album, but it was her magnum opus. Came out and it immediately went to number 1, I think in 1997, 98, won every award that year, Grammy, whatever. And it's just every single song in here is just absolutely sung well, written well, just an amazingly good, put together well. It's a very well put together album. All the songs sound good. I read a little bit about it, how much effort she put into this. It took her 2 years to do the whole album. At one point, everything that was done on the album, she listened to it and said, I don't like the way it sounds. They just trashed everything and started from scratch. Because as she said, it sounded too commercial and too rock and roll. I want it to sound more country and less commercial. She redid the entire freaking album. So if you get a chance, I've always been kind of a Lucinda Williams fan. I don't know why. I've never actually owned this, or if I've owned it, why I got rid of it. But the album is called Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. It's it lives up to its reputation. One of the best albums I've ever listened to. Great stuff. No movies this week, Jim?
No, I actually grabbed 2 real quick.
Okay.
So I'm a big Studio Ghibli fan. I think you can do no wrong. So I'm just going to go a couple of quick ones. Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, absolutely spectacular movie. Nausicaa.
Yeah.
You should get it. This version is the Disney presents Studio Ghibli. If you go around to used stores, that's the version of these that you want to try to find. If you can, great dubbing, really spend a lot of money to do it right. The other one is Princess Mononoke, right? So I managed to score both of these Blu-rays for a fairly inexpensive amount, and I'm a big Studio Ghibli fan. So I think if you get a chance, go to your library, check them out, and watch them. Great stuff.
By the way, my wife and I saw Hail Mary Project today. Great movie. I highly recommended it. I think I may be the number 1 movie this year. I have a feeling it's family friendly. The heroes is a math guy, which my wife loved. She loves math heroes. He was it's just a really good movie. I don't want to give away too much, but the premise is cool.
I hear Rocky steals the show.
Rocky. The bromance between Rocky and Ryan Gosling's character is great. That's the whole show, and it's really good stuff. And I can only imagine poor Ryan Gosling having to act across from a CGI character. He does a great job. He's probably one of the favorite things I've seen him in is this movie. That's
fabulous.
And of course, it's based on a weird novel, and he wrote The Martian. He's an absolute excellent author. So
yeah, Andy Weir.
Andy Weir,
yeah.
Well, I will say we definitely had a very informative, very
lively.
That's a good word. Everybody, make sure you take your blood pressure medicine before you go to sleep. Want to make sure everybody's good at today's live stream. Folks, live streams the next couple of nights, 8 o'clock. Might be 2 on Saturday. I might be on D'Angelo's show at 9 o'clock after Rachel and I do our 8 o'clock. And I believe that there will maybe be inappropriate characters on Sunday. I just do way too much of this stuff. Folks, on that note, thank you to everybody, especially Agile. I mentioned it before, huge supporter of this channel and other channels from the OSR, but Agile was extremely generous tonight, so thank you,
Yeah.
Agile. As always, be safe, be well, God bless, roll this dice, roll them well, and I will catch many of you all tomorrow.
Thanks, folks.